Welcome to the Classical Commons podcast. I'm Rob Jackson, founder of Classical Commons, a digital platform connecting classical school communities across the country to talent and training resources. By promoting excellence in classical schools, we're helping to create an ecosystem for liberal arts education. I recently met today's guest at a forum on educational policy and was delighted to learn that she has a place in my heart because she placed her child in the care of a classical charter school. And she seemed to love it. So I discovered that Kate Anderson was senior counsel with the Alliance Defending Freedom and the director of the Center for Parental Rights. And I just wanted to kind of spell this out before we get talking, Kate, because you have a lovely background. Gonzaga you were, of course, on the law review, graduated magna cum laude, did it all, and then decided to join ADF, the Alliance Defending Freedom, back in 2015, where you're leading that and directing that program for parental rights. So that backstory is important, but it is really essential for us, for many of our listeners, to know that you're a parent and that you're very concerned about your own children, obviously, and you've chosen a classical education. Would you mind just telling us a little bit of that story before we get underway with our topic today?
Yeah, well, I'm an attorney, but I'm also a mom, and I have three beautiful kids ranging from 2 years old to 10, and we have had classical education, the great gift of classical education all the way through. We had the grace of being in Arizona where there's wide charter education options, and we're able to benefit from a charter education there. And then we recently moved to a state with much less school choice, but still wonderful classical schools. So we were able to get into a private classical school, and it's just been a great fit for my two kids that have been there so far, and I got one headed there next year. But it's just been a really good fit for both of them, even though they're really different personalities and learning styles.
That's wonderful. And of course, we often talk about this in classical circles, that we would love to see liberal arts education be something that's truly accessible for every student, again, regardless of their backgrounds and their differences temperamentally and otherwise. So it's lovely to hear that that's the case even in your own family. Mm-hmm. Well, our topic today concerns a Supreme Court case that is scheduled to be argued later this month, end of April. And it is often referred to as the Drummond case. You can perhaps, I'm sure, you can cite chapter and verse or give me the specific references there. But the Drummond case, in most circles that I've been in, primarily is summarized as a case concerning a classical Catholic charter school in the state of Oklahoma, which received its charter from the state originally, but then was going to have it rescinded when the attorney general there, Drummond, decided that that was not the will of the people, at least in his reasoning. So would you mind just providing us, Kate, a little summary of this case, its background, obviously the litigants and the issues at stake here with a classical and Catholic charter school in the mix here?
Yeah. So this case really comes down to providing more options, and specifically charter options, to parents in the state of Oklahoma and then beyond that. But the case arose because the Diocese of Tulsa and Oklahoma City decided to start a charter school. Oklahoma has broad charter programming where they allow private entities to create schools, come into the state, they're approved by the state, but then they're run by these private entities. And it's created a lot of innovation and advancement in education in Oklahoma. It's very highly sought after by families. And so this school, St. Isidore, came in to provide that. They were approved by the state board because of their merit. They offered high quality education. The classical Catholic piece of it has been tried and true in Oklahoma and elsewhere. So the state was excited. The state board was excited about having this option. And the other piece that's interesting about it is it was a virtual classical charter school.
Right.
So it would be open to all students across the state, no matter where they live, their economic situation, if they're in a rural area in the state without a lot of other school options. So they had 200 families already that wanted to be part of this school. Well, the leadership changed in the state, and the Attorney General disagreed with the decision to approve this charter school because of its religious nature. And so he sued the charter school board in the Supreme Court of the state and prevailed in forcing the state charter school board to retract approval and basically kick St. Isidore out of the charter program. That's the issue going up to the U.S. Supreme Court now, because both St. Isidore and the state charter school board have fought that ruling and want the Supreme Court to weigh in to approve this school and its ability to function.
Now, is St. Isidore's currently out? Has it been effectively removed from the charter? The charter's been removed, rather?
Yes, it has, because of the order in the state Supreme Court. And it was ready to go. And because of the virtual nature, they had hired teachers, they had a principal, they had 200 families that wanted to benefit from this, and they were ready to fully run. And because of the case and the actions of the Attorney General, they lost their charter and have not been able to open. So those families and others are not able to currently benefit. But we're hopeful that with the Supreme Court weighing in on this, that soon families will be able to benefit from this kind of a program.
So the litigants here would be, obviously, St. Isidore's would like to recover its charter. The charter board itself is looking to get a reversal of that decision. And the Attorney General, Drummond, is, of course, taking it all the way up and suggesting that the ruling at the Oklahoma level was accurate. What are the sort of fundamental issues here? Kind of what's at stake, and how will those arguments likely unfold? What we're going to see here later this month.
Well, the issue is whether the state charter board was right to approve this school. And that pulls into it questions about whether charter schools are public schools or private schools, whether they're somewhere in the middle. And that's a lot of what's being discussed at the Supreme Court. Sure. Looking at the history of charter schools have been private entities that were opened up. They get funding from the state, but they're created by private parents, organizations, teachers that come together and want to start these programs. And they were created to be different than the public schools, to provide something innovative and different and unique. Like all of the classical schools, they can bring that particular focus and mission into their education in a way that the public schools can't. So that's really at the heart of what's at stake is, can those organizations continue to function with the approval of the state, with state funding going to parents to help them pay for this education, but without the same oversight and public label and everything that comes with it that goes along with public schools. And we think it's very clear based on the way the charter was created in Oklahoma and based on Supreme Court precedent, that charter schools are private entities that are taking part in this program. And because of that, there's no reason to leave out a religious organization. And in fact, there is Supreme Court precedent that says that they have to be allowed in, because otherwise you're treating religious organizations worse than secular organizations. And that is something that the Constitution prohibits.
Okay. So on that note, and because we are, of course, debating constitutional questions, on what grounds constitutionally is the Attorney General and his team going to argue against the St. Isidore's receiving a charter?
Well, the Attorney General is raising what's called the Establishment Clause, the idea that that religion and the government need to be separate. But he's somewhat misunderstanding the precedent on that. So he's saying that because these charter schools are public, which is what he sees them to be, they're the same as public schools. Because of that, the government can't be funding a religious education. But that's missing fundamentally what those charter schools are. They're not public entities. And there's a lot of Supreme Court precedent that talks through how you determine whether something's public or private. And that includes looking at if it's privately created, established, run, then it's private, not public. But that's sort of what's swirling around in this, is the idea of what is the actual nature of a charter school. And then given that nature, does that mean that the government can't fund it because it's religious? I'm sure you're going to ask me what our best argument is next.
I will. But before I do that, in terms of this private entity that has been established, right, as you said, with precedent, are there other private entities, religious or otherwise, that receive public funding and act on the good of, or for the good of the people in some respect?
Absolutely. And that really ties into our position on the case, is that the government here has set up a public benefit program, something where they're inviting private entities to come in and contract with the government and take part in this benefit program to provide services to the public. And when they do that, the Constitution requires, under what's called the Free Exercise Clause, that secular organizations and religious organizations are treated the same and equally. So when St. Isidore's came in, they were approved on their merits of the high quality education they were going to offer. And the only reason they were removed from the program was because of their religious character. And there's been a trilogy of cases at the Supreme Court, starting with a case called Trinity Lutheran, moving to a case called Espinoza, and one called Carson, where the Supreme Court looked at this kind of situation, even in the school context, and said, government money can go to a religious school when they're taking part in one of these public benefit programs to provide services to the public. And if you think about it, this happens in other contexts. There are all kinds of faith-based hospitals, charities, adoption agencies. All of those organizations and others are contracting with the government, taking part in some kind of a public benefit program, but they retain their religious character.
Sure.
And there are secular hospitals and secular charities and secular adoption agencies that do the same thing. And those are being treated the same. The same should be true here.
Yeah. Why then do you think that they've chosen to really call out St. Isidore's? Why is there not an obvious analogy or continuation of that public benefit in the context of a charter school?
I think personally, because it's new. This is the first religious charter school in the nation. And so it's a new take on the public benefit program.
Sure.
And since it's a new context, of course, sometimes people are confused about it or trying to work it out.
It's got to be tested. So, yes, your best argument in defense of St. Isidore's and the charter board would be?
It would be kind of what I just talked through, that the free exercise clause requires the government to treat secular and religious organizations the same. Actually, the establishment clause, which is what A.G. Drummond is really leaning on, this idea of separation between church and state, also requires the government not to pick and choose between religions, which requires also that government not treat religion worse than secular ideas or secular organizations. And that's exactly what's happening here. There are many secular run charter schools in the state, and many that provide a certain bend on education, Montessori education, things that are really science-based, classical education.
Sure.
And so to not allow parents to choose religious education through the same kind of a program discriminates against both the organization, and it's bad for those families. Those religious families should be able to choose religious education as well.
I was reading a couple of articles in anticipation of our conversation, from the New York Times and some other organs of media. And I was really struck by how a couple of the professors who stepped forward, law professors, made arguments or at least proposed that this was really going to be bad for education. I want to give you a quote from a Yale University law professor, Justin Driver, who said the Supreme Court this term could quite possibly destroy the American public school as we've known it for the last several decades. Now, what would possibly possess that law professor to make such a significant claim? Destroy the American public school as we know it?
Well, I certainly don't think this case is going to do that. I think this case is going to improve American education because providing more options for parents are better. We all know with our own kids and the kids around us, they're unique, and finding the right fit for them requires more options. And we've seen what's gone on in the country with education and the outcry for more innovation, more options to improve. So I want to start with that.
Yeah.
But I think because it's new, and this is a move into expanding charter education, there is concern about what this means, and people having big reactions to it. But it doesn't change the public schools' ability to be public schools, to offer what they're offering. And there are many families that are going to continue to choose and have public school be the best option for them. Right. The same with private education. Private education is offering something that both charters and public schools can't offer. And what we're trying to do here, and what the state charter board was trying to do, was provide more options for parents in different kinds of education, knowing that each parent is going to need to pick something different. Sure. So it would not take away from the others.
By last count, if I'm not mistaken, we're talking about probably 80 to 85% of American students are still served by local district schools. So I don't think that majority of students is going to suffer. But it just struck me as really almost hyperbolic in terms of the idea that we would be destroying the American public education system as we know it. That's a very different take. Now, this particular case, the Drummond case, seems to have some interesting firsts and some interesting features. As you mentioned a moment ago, first time that a religious charter school is being challenged or questioned, right, in the courts. Are there some other features that we should pay note or take note of?
Well, it's just interesting. I mean, I think that's the biggest one.
Okay.
That this is the first time we've seen a religious charter come into a state and operate. I think it's an exciting new take on education and expanding the options for parents. It's happening in part because of the unique nature of the charter program in Oklahoma, but it gives the opportunity for other states to make innovative changes to their charter programs and expand access to whether it's virtual or other kinds of programs in their states to allow better, high quality education at no cost to parents. And I think you're just seeing that desire in parents across the country to find those better and more options.
You had mentioned, and I think we'd conversed shortly about the amicus brief that was signed by 12 state attorneys general, in support, right, of St. Isidore and of the charter board. Could you just give us a quick recap of their thinking and why they seem to be supportive, and what we were to make of that, to have a dozen states or so supporting the charter board and the St. Isidore School?
Yeah, it was great to see so many states come in. We had wide support from a number of different amici, but the state brief was notable because they were states coming in supporting the charter school board along the lines that we've been talking about, saying we understand that charters are a separate kind of education. This was something that those programs were trying to do, something the public schools aren't doing. And that doesn't necessarily take away from what the public schools are doing. It provides something different that is going to serve the needs of particular kids. And so finding those to be what they are, private entities that are contracting with the state that give us the option to contract with more people to provide more options and better education is something we want as states too. And we support the charter school board in Oklahoma in trying to do that.
That's right. Well, I know that you've probably weighed all the arguments, and you're, of course, betting on your ability and your team's ability there at ADF to bring this home. But what is the likelihood of SCOTUS's ruling, again, based on their inclinations or the precedents that we've seen over the past several years with this particular Supreme Court?
Well, we're very hopeful that the court will see the case the way that we see it. There's been this tension in the constitutional law between this idea of separation of church and state and the idea and truth that you really need to treat religious entities the same as secular entities, and that there's religious discrimination anytime those religious entities or religious people are treated worse. And so you've seen over the last few years this court struggling with some of that back and forth and where you strike the balance. But time and again in cases like this, including cases about public funding going to religious schools, the court had said this does not pose a problem with the concern about separating church and state. This is about religious discrimination. And when states open up these programs and let private entities come into them, they have to treat secular and religious entities the same. And so there's been those three cases I mentioned, Trinity Lutheran, Espinoza, Carson. This case falls right in line with those. And we are very hopeful that the court will take one more step. And then we'll have 4 cases answering this question, that public funds can go to religious organizations to benefit kids and parents.
Well, that's where I was going to head with my last question, which is implications if, in fact, Isidore and the charter board is given the latitude to continue. What are the implications as you see it for school choice, both in Oklahoma and across the country?
I think it's important because it's a step towards more options, more opportunities for kids and parents. Every kid is different and they need to find the school that's going to work well for them. And we've been talking to families in Oklahoma and hearing about families that when they found a classical charter education, that was the difference between their kid hating reading and loving reading. And you're seeing this impact on individual kids. So it opens the door to those 200 families that wanted to be at St. Isidore. It opens the door to a vast number of other families in the state because it was virtual and not bound by geography or economics or any other reason. And then it opens the door for other states to decide to go the same way. It'll have an immediate impact on Oklahoma. And then other states that have similar charters or want to build their charter programs similar to this one will have the opportunity to do that. And you saw, like we said, those 12 states coming in and saying, we want the ability to have more options. and states like those would be able to do so.
Yeah. Well, there is something coincidental, perhaps, about St. Isidore of Seville being the patron saint of the school. For those who are not aware, that Isidore was one of the greatest educators of his time and a promoter of liberal arts education. In fact, we get the very notion of the 7 liberal arts from his efforts more than 1,000 years ago. Often considered the father of the 7 liberal arts, we certainly hope that his work will continue at St. Isidore and elsewhere. At Classical Commons, we work with teachers and school leaders and parents to advance classical K-12. So I'd like to just ask you in a final question, Kate, what advice would you have for folks who would like to increase their understanding of the legal casework as it relates to education and parental rights? Like what can they do to be better informed and to properly exercise both their rights and responsibilities as citizens?
Well, check out our website. We're Alliance Defending Freedom, so adflegal.org has tons of information about this case and related matters. You can also follow us on our social media, and there'll be information coming out regularly. We have some video information coming out, as well as written pieces, links to opinion pieces that are coming out, just to discuss the case. And so the case is being argued April. What day is it? April 30th. And then, so the build up to that over the next 2 weeks, there'll be a lot of material coming out, and then we would expect a decision from the court sometime in June, and there'll be much more information coming out then.
Wonderful. Well, we'll be sure to put that in the show notes and to keep track and follow you, Kate, as you continue your efforts there at ADF. Thank you so much for spending time with us today. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.